Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at role-based access control and how we can implement it within a very simple FastAPI application that we have here. So role-based access control is simply a mechanism that is implemented in a way that we allow access to specific endpoints or specific functionalities within our application or within our API in this case, depending on the role that the user has within our application. So this is a very simple example that I have right here. In our application, we are going to have very simple role-based access control by having only two roles, but you can have as many roles within your application, and then you can figure out the different kinds of permission you allow for those specific roles within your application. So for my example, I have only admins and users. So users are going to be the normal people who sign up to use the application, while the admins will be pretty much the people who have all the admin privileges to perform almost everything within the application. So these are the two roles. We have the admin role and we also have the user's role. Now the user's role is going to have the following permissions. The users will be able to perform CRUD on whatever book they submit. So by doing the CRUD, all we're doing is to pretty much handle everything that's related to a book submission. When a user submits a book, that book will be made public by admins, and then those admins will be able to go ahead and make it public. When they make it public, then other users will add reviews for that specific book. So we're going to look into how to do almost everything. But the point is, with those roles comes permissions. So everything listed here is a permission. What you are allowed to do within the application is your permission. And now we see that admins can pretty much add users, change roles, perform CRUD on users, basically do their own book submissions. They can pretty much do everything within our app. So we're going to be looking at a very simple example and how we can implement this in the video. So to begin, we're going to build an API endpoint that's going to allow us to get a single user within our app. To do that, we're going to head over to our dependencies, where we pretty much did everything that's related to validating our tokens. Now the beauty about FastAPI's dependency injection mechanism is the fact that we can create dependencies which also take in other dependencies. So for example, if we want to create the dependency for getting a currently logged in user within our application, all we have to do is to create a function, and we're going to call this getCurrentUser. And this is going to take in the token that is provided via the authorization headers, as we looked at in the previous videos. So to do that, we can just simply say that our token details are going to be got, or this will be actually a dictionary, but they'll be got from using any of the objects created from these dependency classes that we created. So we can just search by using the depends function. So I'm going to go at the top right here and import it. I'll say from FastAPI, we shall also import the depends function. And once we've imported the depends function, we are simply going to go ahead and make use of it by saying depends, and then we shall inject in the dependency, which is going to be an object of our access token. So the access token is where we're going to get the information about the currently logged in user, and therefore we shall create an object of type access token bearer. So once that is done, then we're going to simply go ahead and decode. Now that our token details actually decode the token and return the details, we can simply get the user's email and then use one of the utility functions we created for the previous videos to get the currently logged in user and return the object. So the way we're going to do that is by simply accessing the user email. So we may say that our user email is going to be equal to, so in this case we're going to get token data. So our token detail is going to contain the user dictionary, and inside this user dictionary we encoded the email. Now if you did not look at this, please go ahead and look at the previous videos where we looked at JWT authentication. So when we get our email, then we need to also make use of our session dependency. Now we can inject into a dependency as many dependencies as we want, but the problem is you need to do this for only dependencies that you're going to use within routes. If you do inject a dependency into a class, or let's say a method or a function that you're using outside routes, this is not going to work. But since this is a dependency that we're going to use within our routes, then it is going to make sense for us to do the extra dependency injection. So I'm going to begin by importing the get session function. So I'll do that by basically importing it from source.db.main, and then we can go ahead and import the get session function, which we call our get session dependency. So I'll just come right here, and then what I'll do is to simply go ahead and I think I'll have to format this to make it look a little bit organized, and then we shall have our session. So this session is going to be an object of type async session. I think I'll have to import it since I haven't imported it right here. So I'll do that by saying from SQL model dot ext dot asyncio dot session. We shall have to go ahead and import the async session class. Once we've imported the async session class, now we're going to simply go ahead and inject it right here. And once we've injected it, we are now going to specify that it's going to have a default value of our dependency, which shall come from the get session function. So another thing that's important that I felt like I did not explain right in the previous videos is the dunder call method. So every time you want to create a Python object from a class, but you want that Python object to act as something you could call as a function, then that is the method that you're always going to work with. So the dunder call method is one that allows us to create these dependencies and then call them as functions. And that's why you see that we create objects of these classes and then provide them as dependencies within our route handlers or within any other dependencies. So if you do not understand that, you'll get to understand it as we go on in the series. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and query for that user using this session object that we've imported and injected here. So I'll begin by importing our user service class. I'll say from .service, since we're in the auth directory. Then we're going to go ahead and import the user service class. Once we have access to the user service class, we're now going to create the user service instance. So I'll just come right here and say that our user service is going to be an instance of the user service class. And once we've been able to do that, then we're going to go down here and we're going to get the user object. So our user is going to be equal to, now I want you to remember that this is an awaitable, or this is a coroutine, and therefore we have to use await. So we're going to redefine this dependency by saying async, and then inside here we shall just simply go ahead and say await. Then we shall use our user service object. On it we shall call the method get user by email, and in this case we shall provide our user email. Once we've got our user email, the next thing is going to be to simply return the user object. So in this case, we shall just come and say return user, and that will pretty much do it for us. Another thing that I've forgotten is that this takes in the session object. So I'll have to go ahead and provide it by saying comma session. So this is going to be just enough for us to get our currently logged in user. So any checks for the token will be done by this dependency. So let's go ahead and define the route or the endpoint or the path on which we shall get the currently logged in user. I'm going to go ahead and access the routes, which are our auth routes. And inside here, I'm going to begin by defining. So let me get to do this before the logout endpoint. So I'll simply say at auth router dot, in this case want to get the currently logged in user, so I'll say /get, and then I'll provide the endpoint name as slash, or the path name as /me. So you'll go to API /version1/auth and then /me, and in this case we go ahead and say async def, and we shall just simply call this get current user. So in this case we shall just say get current user, and then this will take in our dependency. So I can simply return the user. But for us to define this user, then I have to go ahead and first import our dependency by going right here and saying from dependencies we shall also import get current user. Once that is done, then we are simply going to go down here and then say that our user is going to be an object of the user class. But in case we don't do that, we shall just call our depends, and this will take in our get current user function. Once that is done, then simply returning the user will go ahead and return our user. So by doing that, we shall be in position to just get the currently user object. So look at how simple it is to use dependency injection to write less code. All we have to do is to define the dependency that pretty much does everything we need. And once we do that, we'll go ahead and inject it within our routes, making them have less code. To proceed, we're going to test this endpoint in RESTFox. So I'm going to head over to RESTFox, and what I'm going to do is to create another request, and this is going to be the one for get current. So I'll call this get current user. So I'll provide the API endpoint or the path. So our path in this case is going to be this /me. When try to make a request to this, we see that we are not authenticated, and simply because this takes in the access token bearer dependency. So we have to go to our headers right here. We shall create a new header, and this is going to be our authorization header. So we have to provide the bearer and then the token. So in this case, we have to get a new token. I'll say, so this says invalid username or password. I think I changed or did something. If I say password 123, this will pretty much allow us to log in. So I think I have a problem. Invalid username or password. If I try to go back to create user account, create a new account, I think I did something with the database and the user was deleted. If I try to get the new tokens using this current user, if I go back to where we create the token pair, we can simply submit these credentials with the password, which was test123, and then right here we can be able to successfully log in. Now when I get the token, all I'm going to do is to simply go ahead and use this token within our route for getting the currently logged in user. I'll provide the token, and when I send, we now see that this is going to return the currently logged in user. So you see how simple it is. By just doing that, we've been able to simply go ahead and get our current user without having to write a lot of code. All we had to do was to create a dependency that used another dependency, and therefore we can return our currently logged in user. Now that we've been able to get our currently logged in user, let us go ahead and use this to create roles within our application. So what we're going to do is to add another field to our user model that's going to indicate the role that a user is going to have within this application. And the default role that we shall have is going to be our user role for every user that shall be created within our application. And then after having the user role, admins will be able to update the role of a specific user in our application, just like we're going to see. So right now we're going to simply go back to our user model. We're going to search for our user model that's going to be located within our /auth directory. And inside there is where we're going to add onto what we have as our database model for users, a field to mark the role that a user has on our application. So to begin, we're going to start by saying that each of our users is going to have a role, and this role is going to be a string. Now, once defined, we also need to specify what kind of data is going to be stored in this role, and the default value we're going to have within our data. Now, the thing is, this is a field that we're adding onto a table that already has data, and therefore we have to provide a server default that's going to allow Postgres to understand which data we're going to fill for those fields that are going to be blank, or for the newly created field that is going to be blank. So to begin, we're going to mark this as a field, and we're going to use the field function. And once we've created that, and we're going to make use of the SA column property or argument. Once provided, we're going to name this a column, and this column is going to be of the Postgres type. So in our case, we're going to have pg.varchar. And once that is done, then we're going to say that this is going to be not nullable, so we shall say nullable is going to be false, and we're going to provide the server default. Now, the thing about this server default, argument is that it's going to allow us to provide a default value to fill in, because what we expect is this role is going to be created but shall not have any value. Now, by specifying the server default to user, all we're going to do is to create the role field and then populate it with the user value, so that we can have the default value for the existing users in our database being the user. Once that is done, I'm going to save. So I format my code a little bit, and then now let's go ahead and use Alembic to make this modification to our database. Now remember that we're using lifespan events to make modifications to our database. Every time we create a table, the lifespan event will run and then simply create that table in our database. But from now on, we're going to be making use of Alembic so that we can stop using server lifespan events. So what I'm going to do is to go back to our source folder within our init.py, and then I'll remove this argument of our lifespan function. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it so that none of the code that resides within our initdb will run. And once that is done, then we're going to go within our terminal. I'm going to open up a new terminal, and in this terminal, I'm going to simply go back 2 steps within our root project folder, and in here is where I'm going to create a new revision to add that change to our database. So to do that, we're going to use Alembic revision, and in our case we are going to tell it to auto generate the revision. So it's going to auto generate whatever change we've made from our models, and once we've been able to do that, we shall provide the message which is going to be add roles to users, and this will go ahead and create the revision. To apply this revision, all we're going to do is to say Alembic upgrade and then head. Now, if you're wondering how we are doing all this, I created a video in the series where we set up Alembic to work with our AsyncDB API. I think it will be a very informative video. So I'll press enter, and then this will go ahead and make that change onto our database. Now to confirm, what I'm going to do is to head over to my terminal, and inside my terminal I'm going to open up the SQL shell or the PSQL utility. So I'll say PSQL, and inside here I'll connect to our database, which is bookleetdb. And once I'm there, then I'm going to describe the users table, and this is going to show us that the role field has been added, meaning that we have made a successful revision. So once this is done, we're going to exit this, and then we are going to go back to our code right here. So now that we have the role being added, then we're going to make a few changes to how we create a user and how we can be able to provide them a role. So we're going to head over back to our routes or our paths for creating a new user. And the next thing we're going to do is to simply head over back to our service where I'll create a new user. Now inside here, we defined a bunch of attributes. So some of them are going to be submitted from the client side, while others are going to be modified, such as the password hash. So I'm simply going to go ahead and also add the user part. So I'll say new role, new user.role, and in this case we shall simply provide them with a default user role. Once that is done, then let us go ahead and also add this within the token that we provide to each user. So to do that, we're going to head over back to our routes, and where we encode our token to provide the user details, we're also going to add the user role. So in this case, we're going to come and say that our role is going to be the user's role, and in our case we shall say user.role. Once this is done, now let's go ahead and work with that to be able to create a dependency that will allow us to implement our role-based access control. Now, role-based access control is something that can be as complex, but in this case, we are going to just need a simple way of blocking access to those who do not have a specific role. So to do that, we're going to head over back to our dependencies, and what we're going to do is to create a class that's going to be a dependency. Now, remember that we created this dunder call method, and every dependency that's going to have to be a class is going to have that, because then all you need to do is to create those objects from those classes and call them as functions. So what you're going to do is to come at the bottom right here, we shall create that dependency, and we are going to call this our role checker dependency. So this is not going to inherit from anything, but we shall define it as one that's going to have some attributes. So each object that we're going to have of this class is going to be one to take in a list of roles. So we're going to say that we're going to call this our required roles or allowed roles or something like that. So we may say allowed roles, and this is going to be a list of rows, so we may give it the list type. So once we have done this, then we can even use typing. So to be more verbose and to be more specific, we can use the typing module. So we can say from typing, we are going to import the list type. And once we've done that, then we can explain that this is going to be a list, but for us to be specific, it's going to be a list of string objects. So once we've been able to specify this, then it's also going to return none. And once we do that, then we're simply going to attach that as an attribute to this object, to this class's objects. So what we're going to do is to say self.allowed roles is going to be equal to the allowed roles that we provided to this class. I'm going to format this a little bit. Once we are done with this, then we're going to define the main class that's going to be called each time we create objects of this specific class or objects that you're going to inject into those specific path handlers. I'll just come right here and say that this is going to be a function called the call method. So we're going to simply say async def. So this is going to be our dunder call method, and it's going to be the one that we're going to use to simply check if we are providing a role when accessing a specific endpoint. So this is going to take in whatever it takes in as the arguments and the keyword arguments, but for us to be specific, we're going to provide a dependency, and this dependency is going to be our current user dependency. Now I think you guys are now seeing that where we can enjoy coding with FastAPI. All you have to do is to provide the current user. So in this case, we can say that our current user is going to be, of course, a user object, but this user object is going to be a dependency. So we need to get its dependency by using the depends function. And once we get the depends function, we shall just call a dependency, which is our current user. So our current user is going to be what we get from get current user. And once we've got that, then we can simply say if our current user.role, which is going to be the user's role. Now to make this simple, we can import the user model or import the user class by saying from .models import user, but I'll save time. Well, what I'm actually going to do is to import it just for simplicity. I'll say from source.models, we are going to go ahead and import our user model. This is actually going to be found within the same folder. So I'll say from .models, we shall import our user. And then by using type hints, we shall just come in here and say that our user is going to be an object of type user. And that is going to be returned from this dependency right here. So when we get our current user, we shall get the role of that user and check if it exists inside our allowed roles. So we can say in self.allowed roles, which I actually called allowed roles. Now let me just rename this. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename it by pressing Ctrl D, highlighting and getting all the occurrences of allowed roles. And I'll change this to allowed roles. So if this is true, then we shall simply allow access to the user. And if it is false, then what we're going to do is to simply deny access by raising an exception. So we shall just come right here and say return true. And once this is done, then we're going to come outside this if statement and raise an exception by saying raise HTTP exception. And in our case, we shall deny the user access. We shall say status code is going to be equal to status dot HTTP 403 forbidden, and for our case we're going to provide a detail as that for denying this user or telling them that they do not have sufficient access to access this specific endpoint. So in this case we can say operation not permitted, or let's just say operation not permitted. So we can just come right here and say that we can actually just say you are not permitted to have, you are not permitted to access this or to perform this action. So in this case, you are not permitted, or you do not have permissions to perform this action. So you are not allowed to perform this action. And that will be just what we can simply tell the user when they access that specific endpoint where they do not have the role that is for that specific action. So for us to make use of this, we can go back and simply see how we can use this on our route for getting the current user. So we can go back to our routes, and all we have to do is to first import that dependency. So we called it the role checker dependency. So I need to first create an object of that class by coming right here. So we can call this the admin role checker, or you can simply even call it the role checker. What we can do is to just come right here and say that our role checker is going to be an object of type role checker. And every role checker object is going to have the allowed roles. So in this case, we can provide a list of roles, and these are going to be strings. So we can say that for the start, let's say that this action is to be done by an admin. The only thing we have to do is to go within our routes and inject that as a dependency. So we shall come right here, and since that is simply not going to return any object that we shall use within our routes, can just say underscore or whatever we want. So I'll close what I did there. So I can just come right here and say comma within our get current user. It's actually get current user. So I can say underscore, and then this is going to be our dependency returning a boolean, and this boolean is going to be getting our dependency. So in this case, our dependency is going to be our role checker object. We need to format this a little bit. So for now, if we try to access this endpoint as a normal user, when you go back to our RESTful right here, we shall see that we are not allowed to perform this action simply because we have now said that this route is to only be accessed by an admin. But if we go back and say that even users can be able to get their currently logged in user, so you can say that this can be performed by the admin as well as the user. Then if you try to perform it, then you can be able to get the currently logged in user. Now let us go ahead and add this protection to all the other endpoints. We shall look into some of the endpoints that will be for the admin, but let's go ahead and just protect those for a user. So almost each action performed by a user is going to be performed by an admin. For example, if you go back to the routes for the CRUD that's involved with books, we can just simply go ahead and use the same role checker object. So what I'll do is to go within the routes for our books, and then inside each of them, I'm going to go ahead and make use of this role checker object. So you have to go ahead and import this. So I'll say that we also need the role checker class. And once we've imported it, now let's go ahead and inject it. So I'll just come right here and say underscore, then this is going to be a list of, this is actually going to be a boolean, and what we need is going to be depends, and shall provide our role checker. So I'll say role checker. So what I'll do is to just simply copy what we have here, and then I'll go ahead and paste it, or to simplify our life and to make it a little bit neater, we can actually make use of the dependencies argument within our router.post or router.get or within our HTTP methods. So I can just simply come right here and say comma dependencies is going to be equal to a list of dependencies, and in our case we're going to be making use of our role checker. So once we have done that, I'm simply going to go ahead and provide it within every API endpoint. So I'll just copy the comma as well. Then I'll go ahead and just simply provide it within our route, so within our paths. So this is going to be the one for creating a book. Then we shall also have this for the one that's going to be for getting a specific book by its ID. And then we shall have this one for updating a book. Then we shall have the one for deleting a book. And that is simply going to go ahead and protect this endpoint so that admins and users can access them. So if I go ahead and save, our server is going to be running. So if you go back right here, our server is running. We don't have issues. Seems like the server is not running, or if it's running, then yeah, it's running. Something is wrong. So the server is running right here. So we see that the role checker object has no attribute, role dependency. So the issue here is I try to inject the object directly without having to provide the depends function. So how we deal with that is by simply going ahead and wrapping our dependency object inside the depends function. So what I'm going to do is to simply go here and say depends, and then I'll provide the object, which is going to be our role checker. So by providing this as a dependency, it is already a dependency injected, just like you see right here. So this is just one simpler alternative to going ahead and depending it directly inside the handler function. So once that is done, our server is going to be running, and now we can pretty much perform any other action inside our CRUD for books. And in this case, we shall have the right role and the right access to perform that action. So in this video, we've had a brief introduction to role-based access control when using FastAPI. In the next videos, we're going to be using this role-based access control to create endpoints that will be necessary for admin actions, and also endpoints that will be necessary for user actions. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It's one way you can support the channel. Also, check out other ways you can support the channel by donating to me on my Buy Me a Coffee link, as well as the Patreon right in the description right there. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.